At 12 years old, Opara had become the head of the family. Opara was a strong boy. He lived in a small village with his parents and 3 younger siblings. Every morning, Opara would wake up early to help his father at the farm, while his mother took care of the house. His younger siblings, Uju, Udo, and Odinaka, were always playing around, carefree and happy. But life was not always about playing. Opara was the first child, and in their family, the first child had to carry a lot of responsibility. His father often reminded him, "You are the Opara, the first son. You must look after your siblings." Opara didn't mind. He loved his family and wanted to help. But one day, everything changed. Their parents went to the next village for a meeting. Opara stayed home with his siblings, playing and taking care of them as usual. Night came, but their parents had not returned. It was strange, but Opara didn't worry too much at first. He thought maybe they would come back in the morning. But morning came and still their parents didn't return. Opara started to feel a knot in his stomach. He didn't want to threaten his siblings, so he kept calm and told them to wait. By noon, people from the village began to gather in front of their house. Opara felt his heart race. He could tell by the faces of the villagers that something was very wrong. Finally, the eldest man in the village stepped forward. He looked at Opara with sad eyes and said, "Your parents, they are gone." Opara's word stopped. His parents were gone. How? Why? He wanted to ask, but his mouth wouldn't open. He could only stare in disbelief. His siblings, too young to fully understand, cried when they saw the sadness in Opara's eyes. From that day on, Opara's life changed completely. The villagers came together to mourn and support the children, but everyone knew that life would be very hard for them now. The elders decided that Opara would take care of his siblings. "You are the Opara," they told him. "You must protect your brothers and sisters." Opara sat on the ground, staring blankly at the freshly covered graves of his parents. The village was quiet, save for the soft rustling of the wind. His heart felt heavy, the weight of the world crushing down on him. As the eldest, it was now his responsibility to take care of his siblings, Uju, Udo, and Odinaka. His hands, still young, felt calloused from the sudden burden. Uju approached him, her small hand resting on his shoulder. "Opara, what will we do?" she whispered. Opara swallowed hard. He didn't have an answer, but he knew he couldn't let them see his fear. "We will be okay," he said, his voice steady though his heart raced with uncertainty. At 12 years old, Opara had become the head of the family. He tried to be strong, but it was not easy. Every morning he woke up before the sun, prepared food for his siblings, and sent them to school. After that, he went to the farm to work. His hands, once soft like a child's, were now rough from the hoe. His back ached from bending over the crops, but he kept going. He had no choice. Uju, the second oldest, tried to help, but she was only 9. She could sweep the house and fetch water from the stream, but Opara didn't want her to work too hard. She still needed to go to school, just like Udo and Odinaka. They were too young to understand what had happened. Odinaka, the youngest, would sometimes ask, "When will Mama and Papa come back?" Opara didn't have the heart to tell him the truth. Instead, he would hold Odinaka close and say, "They are watching over us." One cool evening, Opara stood in the village square. His jaw clenched as the elders spoke to him in stern tones. They were advising him on how to handle his responsibilities, suggesting that he take on more help or even consider giving his siblings to relatives who could take care of them better. But Opara shook his head. "I won't send them away," he said firmly, meeting the gaze of the oldest man in the group. "They are my family and I will take care of them." The elders sighed and looked at the others. "You are still young, Opara. It is a very heavy burden." "I know," Opara replied. "It is mine to bear." "Okay, if you say so," one of the elders replied. One day, as Opara was returning from the farm, he found Uju crying in the house. "What is it?" he asked, sitting beside her. "The other children laughed at us," Uju sobbed. "They say we have no parents and that we are poor." Opara clenched his fist. It wasn't fair. It wasn't their fault that their parents were gone. But what could he do? He was just a boy himself, but he had to be strong for his siblings. "I will talk to them," Opara said firmly. "Don't cry, Uju. We have each other. That is all that matters." But deep inside, Opara felt the weight of his responsibility grow heavier. Every day was a battle. He had to make sure there was enough food, make sure his siblings were safe, make sure they could go to school, Sometimes Opara wished he could run away from it all, but he knew he couldn't. He was the first son, and this was his duty. A week later, Uju followed Opara to the farm. While at the farm, Uju wiped the sweat from his brow as he tried to pull out wheat in the field beside Opara. His hands were small and the weeds were stubborn. "Let me help you, Opara," he had said earlier, desperate to prove that he could be useful despite his age. But now, after just a few minutes under the sun, his back ached and his hands were sore. Opara noticed his struggle and crouched beside him. "It's okay, Uju. You don't have to do everything," Opara said gently, taking the weeds from his brother's hand. "But I want to help," Udo insisted, his voice filled with frustration. Opara smiled, ruffling Udo's hair. "You help just by being here. That's enough." As the years passed, Opara grew taller and stronger, but his heart was heavy. The villagers still respected him, but they couldn't understand what it felt like to be him. They saw a boy who had stepped up to be a man, but inside, Opara still felt like the same scared boy from that day his parents died. One evening, as the sun was setting, Opara sat outside, watching his siblings play. Uju was now 12, Udo 10, and Odinaka was 8. They laughed and ran around, chasing each other. For a moment, Opara smiled, happy to see them enjoying themselves. But then a thought struck him. "What if I failed them?" he whispered to himself. "What if something happens to me? Who would take care of them?" The thought frightened him. He stood up and began to pace, his mind racing. He had worked so hard to make sure they had enough food, clothes, and a roof over their heads. But was it enough? What if something went wrong? Opara stood at the edge of the village, looking out at the distant hills. His fist clenched as tears welled up in his eyes. It wasn't fair. His parents were gone, and now it was up to him to make sure his siblings survived. Every day felt like a battle against hunger, against fear, and against the crushing responsibility he wasn't ready for. He kicked a stone hard, sending it flying. "Why us?" he shouted into the empty landscape, his chest heavy with emotions, but there was no answer, only the wind carrying his voice away. After a moment, he wiped his face and turned back towards the village. He had to keep going. His siblings were counting on him. Later that night, as Opara lay in bed, he couldn't sleep. His mind was filled with worries. He thought about how much he had changed since their parents were gone. There were days when he felt like he was drowning in responsibility, but he couldn't let himself give up. One day when things were particularly hard, an elder from the village came to visit. His name was Nna. He was an old man with a kind face, and he had always been a friend to Opara's parents. "Opara," Nna said, sitting down beside him, "I see how hard you are working. Your parents will be proud." Opara felt tears well up in his eyes. He hadn't cried since the day his parents died, but Nna's words brought all the pains and pressure back to the surface. "I don't know if I can do this," Opara whispered. "It is too much." Nna placed a hand on his shoulder. "You are strong, Opara, but you don't have to do everything alone. There are people who want to help you." Opara shook his head. "But I am the Opara. I must take care of my siblings." "Yes, but even the strongest people need help sometimes," Nna said gently. "You are still a boy. It is okay to ask for help." Opara looked at the old man, feeling a small glimmer of hope. Maybe he didn't have to carry the weight all by himself. From that day on, Opara started to lean on the people around him. The villagers helped with the farm work, and Nna would often come by to check on them. Opara still felt the pain of being the first child, but he began to realize that he didn't have to carry it alone. But even as he found some relief, Opara knew that the journey was far from over. Every day brought new challenges, and he had to keep going for his siblings, for his parents, and for himself. As the day passed, Opara found himself adjusting to his new reality. Though the pain never left, he still woke up early every morning. But now, instead of working alone, he had some help from the villagers. They knew how hard things had been for him, and even though they had their own families to take care of, they always made time to lend a hand. But no matter how much help he got, Opara still felt the weight of his responsibilities. Every decision he made, every action he took was for the sake of Uju, Udo, and Odinaka. Sometimes he would watch them playing and wonder if they had forgotten about their parents. But then he would see the sadness in their eyes during quiet moments, and he knew they hadn't. They were just trying to be strong, just like him. One day, while Opara was at the market buying food for the week, he overheard a group of boys his age talking. They were laughing and joking, talking about a wrestling match that was happening that evening. "Are you going?" one of the boys asked his friends. "Of course, I wouldn't miss it for anything," the other replied. "All the boys from the nearby villages are coming. It is going to be the best match of the year." Opara paused for a moment. He hadn't been to a wrestling match over the years, not since before his parents died. Wrestling used to be his favorite thing to watch. His father had even started teaching him how to wrestle, but now there was no time for such things. He sighed and continued with his shopping. He had more important things to worry about. As he made his way back home, carrying the basket of food on his head, he saw Udo and Odinaka running towards him. They were out of breath and looked excited. "Opara, Opara," Udo shouted. "There is a wrestling match tonight. Can we go, please?" Opara looked at their eager faces and felt a pang of guilt. He had been so focused on making sure they had food and clothes that he hadn't thought about their happiness. They were still children after all. They deserved to have some fun. But could he really afford to take a break from his duties? He hesitated, then finally nodded. "Alright, we will go." Uju, who had been standing nearby, smiled brightly. "Thank you, Opara. It's going to be so much fun." That evening, as the sun set, Opara and his siblings made their way to the wrestling field. The entire village had gathered, along with people from neighboring villages. The air was filled with excitement and laughter, and for the first time in a long time, Opara felt a sense of normalcy. The match began, and the crowd cheered as two boys from different villages entered the ring. They were strong and skilled, but Opara couldn't help but feel a longing in his chest as he watched them. He had once dreamed of becoming in that ring, showing his strength to the village, but now those dreams seemed to be far away. As the match went on, Udo and Odinaka jumped up and down, cheering loudly for their favorite wrestler. Uju clapped her hands, her face glowing with joy. Opara watched them and felt a warm feeling in his heart. For a brief moment, they were just like any other family, enjoying the simple pleasures of life. After the match, as they walked home, Uju turned to Opara and said, "Thank you for taking us. I haven't seen Udo and Odinaka this happy in a long time." Opara smiled softly. "I am glad you enjoyed it." But deep down, he knew that moments like this were rare. Tomorrow they would return to their hard life, and Opara would once again carry the burden of being the first child. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months. Opara continued to work tirelessly, but the weight of his responsibilities began to take its toll. He barely had time to rest, and his body grew tired from the endless hours of work. His mind too was constantly filled with worries. There were days when he felt like he couldn't go on, but he always pushed through, reminding himself that his siblings depended on him. On the other hand, Udo ran through the village with a group of other boys, laughing and shouting as they chased each other around trees and huts. For a moment, he forgot about the field work, about the quiet sadness at home. Here with his friends, he could just be a child. But when he returned home, the reality hit him again. Opara was already asleep from exhaustion, and Uju was tending to Odinaka. Udo stood by the doorway feeling a strange mix of guilt and longing. He wanted to help more, but he also wanted to play and be free like the other children. "Come help me with this," Uju called, breaking his thoughts. He nodded, leaving his childish dreams behind once more. One afternoon, as Opara was working in the farm, he suddenly felt dizzy. His vision blurred and his legs wobbled beneath him. He tried to steady himself, but the next thing he knew, he was lying on the ground, staring up at the sky. When he opened his eyes again, he was in the house, lying on a mat. Uju was sitting beside him, her face filled with worry. "Opara, are you okay?" she asked softly. Opara tried to sit up, but his body felt weak. "I'm fine," he muttered, though he knew he wasn't. "You fainted," Uju said, her voice trembling. "You've been working too hard." Opara didn't respond. He knew she was right. But what choice did he have? If he didn't work, who would take care of them? Uju's eyes filled with tears. "You can't keep doing this to yourself, Opara. We need you." Her words cut through him like a knife. He had always thought that he was doing the right thing by working so hard, by sacrificing his own well-being for the sake of his siblings. But now he realized that if he pushed himself too far, he wouldn't be able to help them at all. "I'm sorry," Opara whispered, his voice barely audible. "I just want to take care of you all." "We know," Uju said, wiping her eyes, "but you don't have to do it alone." Opara closed his eyes, feeling a deep sense of exhaustion wash over him. He had been so focused on being strong that he had forgotten to take care of himself. He had forgotten that his siblings needed him to be healthy, not just hardworking. One evening, as the sun set and the stars began to twinkle, Opara and Uju sat outside their hut. The air was cold and the village was settling down for the night. They didn't speak much, but their presence beside each other said enough. They both felt the loss of their parents deeply, and they both understood the pressure they were under. But in this quiet moment, they found comfort in each other's company. Opara stared up at the sky. "Do you think we will be okay?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Uju looked at him, her face thoughtful. "We have to be," she said simply, her hand resting on his arm. Together, they watched the stars in silence, knowing that whatever happened, they would face it as a family. In the days that followed, Opara began to pace himself. He still worked hard, but he made sure to rest when he needed. He allowed Uju to help more, and he accepted the assistance of the villagers without feeling guilty. It wasn't easy for him to let go of some of the control, but he knew it was necessary. The year passed, and slowly but surely, Opara and his siblings began to find their way. Uju grew into a strong and capable young woman, helping Opara with the household chores and taking care of Udo and Odinaka. Udo, though still mischievous, became more responsible as he got older, helping Opara in the farm. And Odinaka, the youngest, remained the joy of the family, his laughter a constant reminder of the happiness that still existed in their lives. Though the pain of losing their parents never fully went away, Opara learned to live with it. He learned that being the first child wasn't just about carrying the burden alone. It was about finding strength in those around him, in his siblings, in his community. And though the road ahead was still long and uncertain, Opara knew one thing for sure: they would face it together. One evening, as the family gathered around the fire, Uju prepared a simple meal of yam and palm oil. The evening air was cool and the sky was filled with stars. Udo and Odinaka were laughing and teasing each other, their playful voices echoing through the yard. Opara sat quietly, watching them with a sense of pride mixed with worry. They were growing up too fast, but the responsibility of caring for them still weighed heavily on his shoulders. As they ate, Udo suddenly stopped and looked at Opara. "Brother," he said, his voice serious for the first time in a long while, "when will things get better? When will we stop struggling like this?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. Opara looked at his younger brother, unsure of what to say. He wished he could promise that everything would be easier soon, but he knew that wasn't the truth. "I don't know, Udo," Opara finally replied, his voice soft but honest. "But as long as we have each other, we will be okay. We will get through it." Udo nodded, but his face still showed worry. Odinaka, sensing the tension, tried to change the subject. "Do you think I'll be able to wrestle when I'm older?" he asked with a grin, flexing his small arm. Uju laughed. "You will have to eat more if you want to be strong enough to wrestle." Opara smiled at his siblings' playing banter, but inside his thoughts were racing. He had been working hard to provide for them, but he couldn't help feel like it wasn't enough. The farm was small, and no matter how much effort he put, the harvests were always small. He worried constantly about how they would survive in long time. What if there was a bad season? What if they run out of food? That night, as Opara lay in bed, sleep refused to come. He kept thinking about Udo's question, about their future, and about his own fear. He had been strong for so long, but the pressure was beginning to wear him down. The pain of being the first child, of being the one responsible for everything, was sometimes more than he could bear. But as he lay there, staring at the ceiling, he reminded himself of something his father used to say: "A strong tree bends, but does not break." Opara knew he had to keep bending, had to keep enduring for the sake of his family. No matter how hard things became, he couldn't break. The next morning, Opara rose up before dawn as usual. He stretched his aching body and quietly prepared to head to the farm. But as he was about to leave, Uju appeared in the doorway, already dressed and ready to help. "Opara," she said, her voice firm, "I'm coming with you today." He was about to protest, but something in her eyes told him not to. She was no longer the little girl who needed protecting. She had grown up, just as he had, and she wanted to share the burden. Without a word, Opara nodded, and they set off together. As they walked side by side in the field, Opara realized how much he had underestimated his sister. She moved with a quiet strength, determined and focused. It reminded him of their mother, who had always been the backbone of their family. They walked for hours, and when the sun was high in the sky, they sat down to rest under the shade of a tree. Opara wiped the sweat from his forehead and looked at Uju. "You have grown so much," he said quietly. "I don't know what I would do without you." Uju smiled, but there was a seriousness in her eyes. "We are all growing, Opara, and we all are in this together." Her words stayed with him as they finished their work for the day. He had spent so much time trying to be strong strong for his siblings that he had forgotten they were strong too. They were all learning to survive without their parents, all finding their way through the pen. And though Opara still carried the heaviest burden, he realized he didn't have to carry it alone. The seasons changed, and with each day passing, the siblings grew closer. Opara continued to lead the family, but he began to rely more on Uju and Udo. They worked together in the fields, took care of Odinaka, and made decisions as a team. The villagers still admired Opara for his strength and responsibility, but they also saw the strength of his siblings. Together they were a family, one that had endured hardship but refused to be broken. One evening, as the sun deepened below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the village, Opara stood outside their small home watching his siblings. Uju was braiding Odinaka's hair, while Udo sat nearby carving a small wooden toy. They were talking and laughing. The sound of their voices filled the air with warmth. For the first time in a long time, Opara felt a sense of peace. The pain of losing their parents will never fully disappear, but they had found a way to live with it. They had found a way to be happy despite everything. And Opara had learned something important. Being the first child wasn't just about carrying the weight of responsibility. It was about being a protector, a guide, and sometimes a listener. It was about finding strength in others and allowing them to find strength in you. As he stood there, the wind gently rustling the leaves of the trees, Opara knew that there would still be hard times ahead, but he also knew that he and his siblings would face them together, just as they always had. The road was long and the journey was far from over, but for the first time, Opara felt ready for whatever came next. The bond between them was unbreakable, forged through loss, love, and resilience. And no matter what the future held, they would walk that path side by side, with Opara leading the way as the first child. The Opara. Moral lesson: life doesn't always go as planned, and sometimes we are thrust into situations that seem too heavy to bear. Opara's journey teaches us that no matter how overwhelming responsibility can feel, we don't have to carry it alone. Strength comes not just from bearing burdens, but from knowing when to accept help and when to let love and unity guide us through the toughest times. Many a times we feel we must endure everything by ourselves to prove our strength, but in reality, leaning on others can make us even stronger. Hard work is important, but taking care of oneself is just as necessary. After all, if you collapse under the weight of responsibility, who will take care of those depending on you? It is okay to feel weak and uncertain, but always remember there is power in perseverance and in the bonds we share with those we love. This lesson applies to everyday life, whether in school, work, or family matters. It reminds us that even the strongest people need support, and there is no shame in accepting help when it is offered. So I urge you never to give up, even if you are not seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Keep pushing forward and cherish the ones who stand by your side. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, do well to subscribe, like, share, leave a comment, and stay tuned for another thrilling story. Until next time, take care and stay strong.